Now, what we're trying to do is pick up from where Andrew has left us. He has done a very critical thing to the SAIs. He has clearly drawn us to the knowledge of the risk factors that are affecting the extractive industries going forward. And now, as the credible and very skilled and good functioning auditors that we are, it is now our duty to take all those risk factors, convert them into audit risk, and then come up with audit procedure to address them. Now that sounds simple when someone is just putting it across the way that I am doing it. But when we're looking at COVID, we need to understand also that in as much as it affected the extractive industries, the public sector, the private sector, it also affected the SAIs. So in as much as we get excited to do all these audits, we also need to look within ourselves as SAIs. Are we able to perform these audits? How has this COVID pandemic affected us as institutions who still have a mandate to keep up to? If you go back to all the mandates that you have in your countries, they haven't changed because of COVID-19, no? No, we can't do face-to-face, we can't travel, we've got social distancing and so forth, but the mandate of the SAI hasn't changed. There's still an expectation that you must audit. But then how are you going to do that when you're also affected? Now just allow me to share my screen and somebody tell me and shout out if the screen is sharing. I can't see from here, but let me know. Let me know when you can see it.
Yes, we can see it.
We can see.
Okay. So what we did as Afro SAI, we took that to cognizance to say, in as much as the SAIs want to do audit, they are also affected. So we did a research, and that research was entitled SAI Resilience in Addressing the Auditor Expectation Gap During Disaster Periods, the case of sub-Saharan African SAIs during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now what we did, we used a combination of cross-sectional, descriptive, and exploratory research strategy methods. Now the research paper itself was able to perform a quantitative and a qualitative analysis on the resilience of quite a number of sub-Saharan SAIs in meeting the stakeholder expectation at the wake of the COVID-19 disaster situation. When we look at the research findings themselves, they've indicated that there is a notable expectation gap in the audit activities which SAIs are expected to perform during the COVID-19 pandemic. However, on the other hand, the expectation gap itself is almost negligible when it comes to post-COVID-19 audits. But during the pandemic, there were various reasons, both internal and external, why SAIs actually did not perform COVID-19 specific related audits. And this even included extractive industry orientated audits. But of course, it is argued that in most cases, the SAIs had been designated as non-essential services. And as such, most SAIs were on lockdown. And hence, they couldn't even pursue the core of their constitutional mandates. But most of the internal reasons why SAIs actually could not meet the stakeholder expectations during COVID-19 could actually be traced back to the institutional general low levels of resilience when it comes to disaster situations. In other words, what we're saying is whether SAIs were locked down or not, because of the internal issues that are weak with regards to responding to disaster situations, SAIs probably would not have done much. Now, when we wrote this paper, the world was still grappling with COVID, and still today, we do not have a clear sign of when this scourge is going to end. Now, the research itself has advanced recommendations that SAIs still have an opportunity to perform COVID-19 specific real-time audits. Now, we are talking about those receipts that you're saying, oh, you should hold on to them. Now, we are saying, no, we don't want you to just hold on to those receipts. We want the Auditor General's Office to audit them as it happens. And we are keenly noting that in response to these constitutional mandates, SAIs did make some reasonable changes, and they did do some wonderful things that actually strengthened the institutions to go forward. Now, when we're looking at the research findings themselves, this research also advances that since disasters do not come in a scheduled roster, that is to say, one after another, you wait for COVID to end and then you bring in cholera, or you wait for cholera to end and then you bring in an earthquake. No, it doesn't work like that. Disasters strike as and at will. And what we are now saying that it is very important for SAIs to continue performing this government disaster preparedness audit even during this period. Because we know that as Africa, we are still prone to these disasters. And one of the things that we noted as we were doing this audit, this research, we actually picked up that East Africa, in as much as it was going through the scourge of COVID, it was actually also going through one of the hardest locust invasions it has ever seen in the past 40 years. Now, when we talk about SAIs and disaster audits, it is very clear that this is an area that SAIs have not really been focusing on for quite a while. Our research has proven that in the past 7 years, more than 65% of SAIs had not done disaster-related audits. Yes, we are doing all the other audits, but we're oblivious of the disaster preparedness aspect of our governments as we're going forward. And this is a glaring issue. And when disaster strikes, we are always being caught by surprise. And during the pandemic itself, I just want to show you the extent to which SAIs did not do much. And if this extent of lack of response to disaster situation has anything to do with the internal strength of the institutions, then it is very clear that as Supreme Audit institutions, we've got a lot of homework to do in preparing ourselves internally. More than 95% of the SAIs that were interrogated through this research did not do anything during COVID-19. And I wouldn't be surprised today that there are some SAIs even amongst us right now, whom to this day have actually not done anything at all, as far as COVID-19 is concerned. We did a 6-way test to check on the resilience of these SAIs. First, we checked on flexibility in taking decisions. How fast were the institutions? How flexible were they? SAIs are very much known to be very rigid creatures, which are also very shy. But when disaster strikes, the ability of the institution to flexibly take decisions becomes very important. And what we realized is in most cases, the SAIs actually performed very well. They also performed very well in responding to change. They responded to change by allowing most of their workers to be able to work remotely from home and so forth. And this also was done with moderate speed in effecting those changes. Now, the key areas where there was a weakness, we realized that the visibility of SAIs to stakeholders was very, very, very low. Most stakeholders did not know that they had a SAI anymore. And as we know, the SAI is a proverbial watchdog. When the watchdog is not there, the perpetrators of crime will certainly be out to play. We also noted that most of the SAIs, there was a lot of disruption of the availability of supplies for SAIs to function. When you're going through a disaster, it is expected that transport networks and all those things are going to be affected. But what we are saying is the SAI needs to adequately prepare and cushion itself to the extent that when these things happen, they do not end up emasculating the SAI from performing its mandate. And lastly, there was a question of active collaboration with external institutions. This was also seen to be an area of weakness for the SAIs. They did not perform very well. Now, when a SAI is found highly in a situation whereby it cannot be resilient to disaster situation, no matter how good its auditors are, no matter how well the risk assessment has been done, it cannot perform a single audit to quality. And as such, it goes back to that strategic position to say, audit institutions, what are you doing to prepare yourselves to respond to disaster situations and remain resilient institutions under these conditions? Now, when we look at our research, it ended up with 7 key conclusions, which of course were followed with 7 key recommendations. We picked up that, of course, SAIs are also prone to natural disaster impact, and as such, there wasn't much which was done in the past 7 years. That is one key finding that we have found, and the SAIs really need to talk to that. They need to respond to that. And whilst the evidence shows that SAIs understand some aspects of the concept of disaster-related audits, it was very clear that SAIs are not very well conversant with the issue of disaster preparedness. This is still a very unfamiliar subject matter to SAIs. And as such, with its level of not being familiar, SAIs clearly could not do much. And the evidence is very much there. 7 years of poll watching. And of course, despite the clear expectation from stakeholders for SAIs to perform audits during COVID-19, pretty much nothing much was done. But we still have a chance to do something because we're still in the game, we're still going through the pandemic, and we still have an opportunity to get back, pick up our laurels, and do something that brings benefit and value to our people. It was quite interesting to note that most SAIs are planning to perform several post-COVID related audits. Mind you, no one knows when we're going to declare the pandemic over, but already there are plans for us to do a lot of work. Now, maybe those plans can only be executed 5 years from now, who knows? 7 years from now, who knows? But in the meantime, we are saying something really has to happen. And when we see most of these post-COVID-19 related audits, we only had one SAI that indicated that it was interested in doing an information systems audit. Knowing the nature of the world that we're living in today, whereby info systems is pretty much the order of the day, it is quite concerning that SAIs are not planning to do a lot more audits in this area. And then lastly, of the findings that we had is that during the COVID-19 pandemic, SAIs did manage to put measures in place to enable their staff to work from home. However, even though SAI employees had all those wonderful gadgets, networks to do the work, they still did not have access to government network systems. So they still could not audit. And these are the things that need to be addressed. And having said that, and with the interest of time, I would like to stop my presentation on this COVID research that we did and just draw questions from you if there are any questions and people who want to understand further about the work that we did and how you can also access it and read it from home. I thank you, Joseph. You can pick it up from here.